vegetables and sell them so he could support his family. The problem is someone told him, instead of selling your fresh produce, put it in your bathtub and let it soak for a while, and you can make more money producing alcohol. So my grandpa became a bootlegger. He didn't know Jesus. The problem was he began to drink his profits, and he became an alcoholic, and he lost everything. My grandma was so disappointed, so depressed, that there was a circus tent that went up a couple blocks from their house. So she says, I'm going to go and have some fun at the circus because I'm miserable. But it wasn't a circus tent. It was a revival crusade. And she walks in this tent, and the preacher says, today you can be forgiven of your sin. Today you can be set free from what binds you. And today you can have a new future. And my grandma, who was so depressed, gave her life to Jesus. And she now said, I'm going to live for Jesus. So she ran home to tell her husband, my grandpa. And my grandpa said, God is no friend of ours. God has never helped us. And I forbid you to go back to that tent. And if you do, I'm going to drag you out by your hair and embarrass you in front of all your friends. Being the stubborn little Mexican grandma that she was, she goes back the next night. The story that my grandpa was so angry and drunk and depressed that he grabs his gun and he says, I'm not only going to drag her out, but I'm going to shoot that preacher. Hope none of you came with a gun today, but as he's walking to this tent, it starts pouring rain. So he gets inside the tent and he says, as soon as it stops raining, I'm going to shoot that preacher and I'm going to drag that woman out by her hair. But as he's standing in the back of the tent, he hears these words. Today, you can be forgiven of your sin. Today, you can be set free from what binds you. And today, you can have a new future. And they said my grandpa wept at the back of that tent. And he said, God, forgive me. I ruined my life. I ruined my marriage. I ruined my family. Will you give me a chance? And he walks down a sawdust aisle and kneels at a sawdust altar. And that day, Jesus forgave my grandpa of all his sins and instantly delivered him from alcohol and called him to be a minister of the gospel all in the same service. He gets up and he tells his wife, my grandma, God has called us to be ministers and we don't have a church. Across the street from his house was a condemned dance hall. With the little money he had left, he buys it and turns it into a Pentecostal church. And at the age of 5 years old, I gave my life to Jesus in a condemned dance hall, and I've been dancing for Jesus ever since. And today I don't have a testimony on how to overcome drugs because I've never taken drugs. I can't tell you to be delivered from alcohol because, well, that's not true. Dr. Charlie, every once in a while in my house, I take a shot of NyQuil. We call that Pentecostal whiskey in our house. I've never gotten in trouble with the law. You say, what can you tell me? I can tell you that the promises of God are real. That the saving power of Jesus can keep you all the days of your life. And because of my grandpa's decision, it changed a generation. And I wanted to be like my grandpa. He was my hero. I'm convinced my grandpa learned English so he could speak to his grandson who couldn't speak Spanish. He loved me. And I wanted to be like him. For you see, I always believed I was called to be a superhero. Matter of fact, since the age of 5 years old, I was Superman. I was the defender of truth, justice, and the American way. There's little Rich Guerra there, boy. I was Superman. And we lived on an acre lot, and every day I would fly around the backyard defending, the home. And my mom used to say, son, don't go outside the yard. Stay in the backyard. You'll be safer in the backyard. We lived on a busy street. I said, Mom, I'm Superman. I'm going to take care. But I had this desire to be a superhero. I wanted to make my life count. I wanted to be a hero. And so I was Superman. But Superman had an older sister. And she didn't want her younger Superman brother to hang around with her. So she makes a mad dash to the back gate to go play with her friend. She forgot that Superman is faster than the speeding bullets, right? But Superman's sister was like 6 feet tall. Superman was like 3 feet tall. So she was able to reach the latch on the chain link fence to get out so she'd go play with her friends and shut the gate, but hey, she forgot Superman can leap tall buildings with a single bound. But something happened. That fence might have been made of kryptonite, because I was flying over the fence, my flyer pooped out, and my feet gave way, and I caught that chain link fence on my arm between the muscle and the bone. And the more I struggled, the more Superman, the deeper that chain link would go in. And it seemed like the Superman hung there forever. And Superman did what superheroes don't do. He cried out for his mommy. But his mommy couldn't hear him. She was taking care of Superman's little brother. But she goes to the kitchen and looks out the window in the kitchen, and she says, "What's that dirty sock blowing on that fence?" "That's not a dirty sock, that's Superman." So she runs to the back fence, and she had more strength than a locomotive, because she was able to pull Superman off that chain link fence, sees that his muscles now dislodged from his bone, takes her dish towel and wraps it up, and rushes Superman to the hospital, where the doctor looks at it and says, "Look out that window," as he cuts Superman's costume off. And it was a brick wall. And I thought walls were supposed to protect us. I thought we were safe. And after he puts 44 stitches in a 5-year-old Superman's right arm, he tells Superman's mom, "You might want to teach him to use his left arm, because I'm not sure he's ever going to use his right arm again." That was the last time I ever remember being Superman. Maybe my mom was right. Maybe it's just safer to stay in the backyard. But if it was my grandpa, I wanted to be like my grandfather, who was the most loving, kind, gentle man of God I've ever known. I wanted to go into the ministry, be like my grandpa. My mom tried to talk me out of it. She said, "Mijo, be a teacher," because she saw how people treated my grandpa as a pastor. But I said, "No, Mom, God's called me to be a superhero." And so I applied to the Latin Bible College because of the church I went to, and they rejected me. I was rejected. I've served on the board of directors in that college, but in that day, you had to speak Spanish to go to that college, and I didn't speak Spanish, so I had to find another college called Southern California College, now called Vanguard University. I remember enrolling, and I didn't know a single person, because no one from my church went to this college, and so I don't know a single person. I'm feeling inadequate. I come from a Spanish-speaking church. I don't speak Spanish. They used to tell me, "God can't understand you," because we all know God speaks Spanish. So I was hoping he had an interpreter up here in heaven with him. So I'm there a week early by mistake, and I'm thinking, "God, what am I doing here? I can't do this. I'm not good enough." But students started coming onto the campus, and while I was on that campus, I had a vision of an angel. It was an angel. I saw an angel. And this angel had blonde hair and blue eyes. And I knew it was an angel because nobody in my church had blonde hair and blue eyes. So I said, "I'm going to marry that angel." And I've been married to that angel for 48 years. But I told that angel, "I can't marry you until we graduate, because I can barely pay for my school bill and your parents are paying for yours. But as soon as we graduate, we're going to get married, we're going to go into the ministry, and God's going to use us in a mighty way." And she actually believed me. And so we got married, we graduated. The church asked us to be their youth pastor. They had never had a youth pastor before. Man, my dream of being a superhero was coming true. We had 12 demon-possessed junior high kids. And after the first week, we had 6, but we were in the ministry. And someone had given me some volleyball poles, so I said, wouldn't it be great to put them in the parking lot? And on Wednesday night, we'd invite kids from the neighborhood to come play volleyball. We had hundreds of kids who would come out. We'd have volleyball tournaments, and in the middle of the tournament, we'd have them all sit down, and we'd preach to them the gospel of Jesus Christ. It was amazing. My dream's coming true. Every Sunday morning, my ministry was ministry of announcements. Oh, your associate gave you the announcements. I had that ministry because that was the only time the pastor was going to let me stand behind the pulpit, was to give the announcements. So I would meet with him in his office before service. We'd go over the list of the announcements. This time he says, "Rich, I want you to sit down. I need to tell you that today's your last Sunday as our youth pastor. We're going to leave my office. We're going to walk onto the platform. You're going to thank the people, but this is your last Sunday." You can imagine the shock, Matter of fact, my wife Connie was sitting on the front row, hearing it for the first time, 7 months pregnant with our first child. Maybe my mom was right. Maybe it's just safer to stay in the backyard. I was devastated. Tomorrow night I'll tell you the story, what happened after that, but I've realized there's kryptonite everywhere. See, I actually believed if I worked real hard, people would recognize that and appreciate it. Boy, was I wrong. Whew. I actually believed if I had a burden to reach lost people that nobody was reaching, that everyone would want to reach people. Boy, I was wrong again. I realized that we live in a culture that I got to just worry about myself, not about people around me. Matter of fact, during the pandemic, almost 5 out of 10 pastors were ready to quit. Now it's 1 out of 4 are ready to quit the ministry because of the kryptonite all around us. I thank God. I thought He'd want me to be a hero. And I came across in my years of ministry a story that I think that God has called us all to be a hero. Let me ask you a question. Is there a hero in the house? Is there a hero here? You see, I've had the privilege and the opportunity to speak all across the nation. I just came back from speaking in Vietnam. I just got back from preaching the General Council service in Costa Rica. We spent 2 years in Sri Lanka. I've been all over the world. And the great churches of America, even the great churches around the world, isn't because they have great pastors. Some of them are great pastors, but not all of them. Some of them aren't that great. I'll just be honest, and they're not that great. But they're great churches because they're made up of great people who love God, who love their church, and who love their pastor. The greatest enemy isn't from the outside, it's the division from the inside. And God is calling you to be a hero. Once again, is there a hero in the house? Is there someone that says, I want my life to count? Like my grandpa, he changed, his family all came to Christ, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren, my children, my grandkids will come to Christ because of one man's decision. What happened today if you became a hero? And God gives us a wonderful example of being a hero, and it's found in Luke chapter 10, starting in verse 25. And it's the story of the Good Samaritan. You've heard it many times, but look into the lens of who the hero of the story. Who is the hero in the story? It says in verse 25, on one day, an expert in religious law stood up to test Jesus by asking him a question. It's funny. This lawyer is testing Jesus. Who do you think is going to win? Who's going to pass the test? And he asked him this question, Teacher, what should I do to inherit eternal life? How many believe that's a great question to ask? It's a great question. He came to the right person, but he had the wrong spirit. And Jesus replied, what does the law of Moses say, and how do you read it? Notice the man's answer. You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Right, Jesus told him, do this, and you will live. The man knew Scripture. The man probably went to church. He had followed the law. But notice what it says in verse 29. The man wanted to justify his actions. He was a lawyer. And like any good lawyer, he was trying to find a loophole in the law. He was trying to find what is an easy way out. What's the minimum requirement for being a follower of Christ? So he asked Jesus, and he asked him this question, and who is my neighbor? He didn't even know his neighbor, and he didn't care who his neighbor was. So Jesus replied with a story. Notice the story. A Jewish man was traveling from Jerusalem, down to Jericho. If you've ever been to Israel, the Holy Land, Jerusalem's on a hilltop. The psalmist says, look up into the hills. And everything goes down. So this man was in Jerusalem. He's going down to Jericho, and he was attacked by bandits. It's like South Central Jericho. It was the gangs jumped him, and they stripped him of his clothes and beat him up and left him half dead beside the road. Now, somebody understand, and Dr. Charlie's a brilliant theologian. I don't know what half dead means. What is half dead? Is it like being half pregnant? What is half dead? It means he couldn't help himself. My grandpa was half dead. He lost everything. He was beaten and left on the side of the road. And maybe that's you today. Maybe life didn't turn out the way you thought it should turn out, and you find yourself beaten and half dead. He goes on to tell the story. By chance, a priest came along, but when he saw the man lying there, he crossed to the other side of the road and passed him by. The temple assistant walked over and looked at him lying there, and he also passed on the other side. Here are religious leaders seeing the condition of this man, and they say, I'm not going to get involved. Have you ever gone to like Target, my wife's favorite store? And there's always people there with signs, but you tend to go to the other door because you don't want to get engaged in that. That's what these two men, and it says, then a despised Samaritan. I love Jesus' description. He calls this Samaritan despised. He's proving a point. The Jewish people had nothing to do with Samaritans. So he's kind of rubbing it in. This despised Samaritan. It was like this despised little Mexican from Pacoima. That's what he's saying. That's who I was. It says, when he saw the man, he felt compassion for him. Going over to him, the Samaritan soothed his wounds with olive oil and wine and bandaged him. And then he put the man on his own donkey and took him to the inn where he took care of him. The next day, he handed the innkeeper 2 silver coins, telling him, take care of this man. And if the bill runs higher than this, I'll pay you the next time I'm here. Now, notice the end of the story. Now, which of these 3 would you say was a neighbor to the man who was attacked by bandits? Jesus asked. The man replied, the one who showed him mercy. Then Jesus said, yes, now go and do the same. Let me ask a question. Who's the hero in the story? Was it the Levite? Was it the temple? Was it the temple assistant? It was a Good Samaritan, right? That's not a trick question. He's the hero in the story. He's an example of who Jesus is. It's the example who saw my grandpa in the back of that tent. Matter of fact, Jesus, standing on the right hand of his Father, says, Lord, let me go. Let me go for that person. You see, the lawyer didn't know who his neighbor was, and he didn't care who his neighbor was. The reality of the story is people were suffering, and he did nothing. We live in a culture. We're surrounded by people who are suffering. Now, Jesus, the Good Samaritan, was compassionate. He considers the cost, and he continues to care, right? When we come to Jesus, he considered the cost of leaving his throne in heaven to come and die on a cross for your sin and my sin. And he considered the cost because of his compassion, and he continues to care for us. But the Good Samaritan, who Jesus represents, is different than the lawyer, who is calculated, cautious, and cowardly. My fear as I travel is that the church has become like the lawyer. They estimate that every year 1,000 churches will be planted, but 4,000 will be closed. How many believe one day Honolulu First Assembly will no longer be a church? They will bulldoze this thing down and build a park. You don't believe that, do you? Right? No. Neither of those 4,000 churches. What happened? We've lost heroes. We lost people who have dedicated themselves for the cause of Christ. Let me ask you a question. Is compassion the posture of your heart, or simply an event we organize? This is one of the most compassionate churches I know. You saw it in the promo. This is us. This is a compassionate church. I brought my wife here some years ago for our anniversary, and it was
the biggest hurricane that hit the island in 80 years. Remember that? Every time I plan something, a national disaster happens. My wife says, stop planning every time we go someplace. But this church rallied. I remember asking Pastor Clayton, how can we help you provide those mobile little homes, the little igloos that you were giving people? How this church has always responded. They've always responded. But what would be its future? I'm here to tell you that God gets no glory by empty seats. There's people to reach. There are people all around us. Those of you who have these different sites, God bless you for reaching your community for Jesus. God bless you. Yeah, there's, 1.4 million people that live on these islands. 350,000 live in Honolulu. But the people that are around us need to be reached. We need to act like the Good Samaritan. We need to live like the Good Samaritan. But are we a people that really believe that people count? See, we're in the people business as Christians and as a church. So my question is, what's our future? What's your future? And it starts with, who's going to be a hero in the house? Who says, I want to make a difference. I want to be someone that God can use. The story gives us, I think, these 4 qualities of heroes. Number 1, we need to see people. It says in verse 33, when he saw the man, that word saw doesn't mean he just saw him physically. He saw the spiritual condition of that man. The problem that we all face is we see suffering so much. We see so much stuff that we become numb. We become desensitized. We see people on street corners with a sign, and we just kind of look the other way. We're not seeing people. When I pastored, I used to tell my people, I wanted you to invite your unsaved friends to church. And they used to say, Pastor, we don't know any unsaved people. I said, what? We don't know. I said, what? You don't know? They go to work with you. They go to school with you. They live across the street from you. Some of them live in the same house you live in. But you don't know them because you don't see them. They're the waitress that will bring your lunch today. They'll be the cashier at the grocery store that will check your groceries, an Amazon driver that delivers your packages. They're around us, but do you see them? There are 9 billion people on this planet, and Jesus sees every one of them. He sees your tears. He hears your cry. Are you willing to see people? You see, you will never be called to demonstrate more compassion than Jesus demonstrates to you and to me. You've got to see people around us. But secondly, not only do we see them every day. I saw them driving here this morning. But you have to have compassion for people. Why is it the longer we're Christians, the less compassion we have? Remember when you first come to Jesus? How much you loved coming to church? You loved the music. You loved the preaching. You responded to every altar call. What happened? All of a sudden we became critics. Oh, I don't like this music. I don't like it. You've lost, as a philosopher said, you've lost that loving feeling. You've lost compassion. You see, when he saw the man, he felt compassion for him. You're familiar with the story with Jesus preaching to the thousands that were following him in Matthew chapter 9, verse 36. And when Jesus saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were confused and helpless like sheep having no shepherd. I used to think that word meant that Jesus felt sorry for these people that he was speaking to. No, that's not what it means. He didn't feel sorry. The word compassion is a Greek word made of 2 words. With suffer, or suffered with. He suffered with those people. He actually suffered with them. He not only walked a mile in their shoes, he was willing to take the sins of the world upon his own body. He had compassion. He reaches out to people through us today. Let me ask you a question, and I know this church well, and I know your pastor well. But your church won't become what you want. It will become what you are. It's Honolulu First Assembly, the most compassionate church in Hawaii. It's the most responding to crisis. It never gives up. It always sees the challenge. That's the kind of church I believe you want to be. And it starts with being a hero. Well, I remember my little boy, my first son, they had a little car seat in the back, and it was when you had to put car seats in. Remember the day when you didn't have to use car seats? You just let them roll around on the back seat, but then you had to get car seats. So we got one that had a steering wheel. Remember those? And it had a little steering wheel, a little horn, and he'd be pretending like he was driving. He's in the back seat. Connie's next to me in the front seat, and I hear in the back seat him honking his horn. He says, "Get out of the way, jerk!" I turned, Connie, what are you teaching this little boy? He was imitating someone. Who are you? What are you showing your children? Who are they imitating? What are your grandchildren imitating? You know, we go home and we roast the duck, we roast the pig, we roast the chicken, and then we roast the deacons, we roast church people, we roast the pastor. You got to have compassion. And maybe what we need is a baptism of compassion again. Maybe we need to run to this altar today. God, break my heart for the things that break your hearts. I don't want to die an old mean man. I know too many of them. I want to have compassion. I want to see people. But thirdly, we got to go to where the people are. It says in verse 33 and 34, and then when he saw the man, he felt compassion for him, going over to him. He had to go where this person was. That person didn't come to him. He had to go to them. It was a different race and a dangerous place. Why does God call us to go to people that don't look like us? They don't dress like us. They don't smell like us. And it's a dangerous place. That's where heroes go, where no one else wants to go. That's why you have these churches on all these islands. Why? Because they can't come here. You're going to go there. And you're going to reach people in those communities. God bless you that are watching online. You got a great opportunity to go where the people are. See, the priests and the Levi were more educated. They were more religious. Did I tell you I grew up in a Spanish-speaking church and I don't speak Spanish? I was the most least likely person that God could use. But I made myself willing. And I kept believing that God wanted to use my life and I wanted to be a hero, and so can you. Then finally, we take care of people. It says in verse 34, when he saw the man, he felt compassion for him. Going over to him, the Samaritan soothed his wounds with olive oil and wine and bandaged them. And then he put the man on his own donkey and took care of him. At the end, where they took care of him, notice those words, he took care of him. He took this man, using his own resources to help him. I keep a case of water behind my seat when I drive, because everywhere I drive for a living, the worst traffic in America. You think it's bad in Honolulu. It's bad in where I live. And there's always people on the corners. There are always people, so I grab a bottle of water out of my back. They're everywhere. Not only did he take care of him, but notice, he went to the innkeeper and threw his American Express card on the counter and said, whatever it costs, I'll pay for it. There's some of you that God has blessed that you could throw your American Express card on the counter today and take care of the multitudes who can't take care of themselves. It's not the government's responsibility. It's the church's responsibility. We are called to be the heroes. I've been in this business for 48 years, and it's the same way everywhere I go, regardless of the size, that 20% of the people give 80% of the resources. 20% of the people do 80% of the work. It's time that we all become heroes. And Dr. Charlie's book, he talks about everyone who's a believer is called to be a minister, and there's no full-time ministers. You're all full-time. You might be a plumber during the week, but you're still a plumber minister. Or you're a minister full-time, because the half-dead people are all around us. See, after everything Jesus has done for us, our payment is to go out and do the same for others. Jesus is not going to ask you to give what you don't have. Jesus is not going to ask you to do what you can't do. He's only going to ask you to give what you have and do what you can do. And in verse 37, and Jesus said, now go and do the same. Now go and do the same. Because the world is in need of heroes, Good Samaritans. I think the state of the church in America is at a real crossroads. That this is where compassion starts to move from what we do to who we are. This lawyer, he could have paid for outreaches. He could have paid. Money was no object for him. But he wasn't willing to get down on his knees and get his hands dirty. And I believe that's what God has called us to do. Remember, he asked the question, what should I do to inherit eternal life? In another version, it says he walked away sorrowful. He missed his opportunity to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. Today in this room, some of you have been hurt. You've been hurt. And Jesus is saying, I've come to bring life back to you. That today you can be forgiven of your sin. Today you can be set free from what binds you. Today you can have a new future. Today, he came for you. I pray that our churches won't become calculated, cautious, or cowardly. That they won't say, what will it do for us, or how will it help us, or I've been hurt before. We have multitudes of people that are sitting in church that have been hurt, and because of that, they've not taken their place of being a hero. I visit a lot of churches, I speak at a lot of churches, and I found you can manufacture hype, but you can't manufacture hope. Give me a testimony of someone who would say, Pastor Rich, I was lost. I was down. And Jesus found me. That's the kind of church I want to be a part of. Is there a hero in the house? That was the first question. I'm now in the hospital room, 5 years old. The doctor had cut off my Superman costume. Sitting there, just hearing him tell Superman's mother, teach him to use his left hand. I hear some commotion in the waiting room, and I recognize the voice. It's a voice of my grandfather. He had a voice. We used to take my grandpa out to lunch at a restaurant. He'd make everyone bow their head in the restaurant. And his prayer would boom through that restaurant. That was my grandpa. And I could hear him out there saying, where's my grandson? I've come to see my grandson. And the attendant said, I'm sorry, you can't go in there. They've just operated on it. So I'm going in there. And he pushes his way by the nurses. And the doctor says, I'm sorry, sir, but we're afraid he's lost function of his right arm. He said, oh, no. I've come to pray for my grandson. He's going to need that right arm because one day he's going to be a preacher of the gospel. He's going to point to people in the audience. I went to Vanguard University. I got a baseball scholarship because I was a shortstop. Because in that hospital room, this 5-year-old little boy saw this great old man pull a little bottle of oil out and pray a prayer of faith. And I did something you probably shouldn't do. I opened my eyes while he prayed. And as I opened my eyes, I got a glimpse of who God was. Someone who loved me. Someone who believed in me. Someone who saw potential in me that no one else saw. And said, oh God, heal my grandson. He's going to be a preacher of the gospel. Let me invite you to open up your eyes and stare into the face of a loving God who loves you, who believes in you, who sees your potential. You see, there are two types of people here. People like my grandpa who is lost, that need to find Christ as your Savior. You can't do it yourself. You're half dead. You need a Savior. that will forgive you of your sins and set you free from what binds you. It doesn't have to be drugs or alcohol. It could be bitterness or unforgiveness. He can set you free today. He can give you a new future, a new marriage. He can do it, but you've got to respond. You have to come like my grandpa. But then there's another that had been affected by kryptonite. You've been hurt. Someone said something, someone did something. They say in every community, 20% go to church. That might mean they show up for Easter and Christmas, but they say they go to church. 20% have stopped coming to church because they've been hurt, they've been offended, they trusted and their trust has been broken. Maybe that's you. And 60% have never been to church a day in their life. They've never heard. No one's ever invited them to church. And maybe you have scars. See, I still have a scar. When I was 5, it was way up here. Now the scar's way down here. That's why I don't get tattoos. Because if I got a tattoo, in the years it'd be down here by the, right? I still have that scar. I'll show it to you. It doesn't hurt me anymore. It's a reminder of the mercy and the grace of God. Now it becomes my testimony. Your greatest hurt can become your greatest testimony. If you let God heal you today, He's here. See, compassion without action is simply